everyone. I can tell from the atmosphere in the room how happy you are all to be here today, and we're happy that you're here too. I'm Kaywin Feldman, the director here at the National Gallery of Art, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the inaugural Sharon Percy Rockefeller panel presentation, which is co-organized by the National Gallery of Art and the Foundation for Art and Preservation in Embassies. This annual program recognizes Sharon Rockefeller for her extraordinary commitment to the arts, FAPE, and the National Gallery. Agnes Gund is the generous sponsor, and she's with us today. Thank you so much, Aggie. And for today's discussion, The Artist's Story, the National Gallery is honored to host artist Jeff Koons, actress and playwright Anna Deavere Smith, and Darren Walker, president of the Ford Foundation, vice president of FAPE, and a valued trustee here at the National Gallery. From FAPE, we want to thank Chairman Joe Carroll Lauder. Thank you, Joe Carroll. President Eden Rafshoon. Eden, thank you. And Director Jennifer Duncan. We are pleased to have everyone with us today. And now it is my great pleasure to turn over to Darren Walker, who's going to kick it all off. Thank you, Darren.
Thank you, Kaywin. Good afternoon, everyone. And it is truly an honor, a pleasure. The room is electrified. There is energy in the air. I think we're all so happy to be together in fellowship among people who love the arts, love this country, and love artists. Speaking of loving artists, I have to join Kaywin in thanking our dynamic, inimitable, dazzling duo. That would be you, Joe Carroll Lauder, and you, Eden Rafshoon, for your amazing leadership of FAPE. Our beloved Agnes Gund, who makes this program possible in honor of another amazing woman, Sharon Percy Rockefeller. So together, you all have created this space, this place, where we can bask in, luxuriate in the glow of these two remarkable artists. They need no introduction because they are both American icons, treasures, unique among their creative community, pantheons in their respective disciplines. And so I want to just frame this conversation by reminding us of the moment we're in. The world has been turned upside down. There is war, strife, a looming, menacing recession, famine. So many reasons to be confused, in search of answers, without hope even. And yet, artists have often been the people who help us make sense of a world that seems to be turned upside down. I would like, because I know both of you, and I love the fact that FAPE and the National Gallery brought you together, because even though I know you both, I did not know you didn't know each other. So maybe to help you know each other better and help us know you better, let's start. You know, Eden came up with this idea for The Artist's Story, which was so enduring, Eden. as a sort of title and framing of this. So let's start with your story, Anna Deavere Smith.
Why aren't we going left to right? I was born in Baltimore, Maryland. Oldest of 5. Is there somebody from Baltimore here? Wow.
Baltimore's in the house.
Oldest of 5 children. My story is that I left home when I was 21 with $80 in an overnight bag, and saying that I would not ask my parents for any more money ever, because I had been one of 7 quote-unquote Negro girls at an all-girls school, believe it or not, named Beaver College. And that put a lot of stress on the whole family. I was the first, really, of, there were 6 in my father's family of children, all college educated, and 8 in my mother's family. But I was the first of my cousins to go to other than a black institution. So I did that, and I became an actor, not intending to become one. And then I had a lot of questions about acting while I was in school. And I came out of that using a kind of a classical training and something my grandfather said to begin what became the work that's the center of my life. And what he said was, if you say a word often enough, it becomes you. And so I had a grandiose idea in the late 70s, early 80s, to become America word for word. And so, and very conscious in doing that it would require me to go where I did not belong. And my goal has been, in part, to come close to strangers quickly by learning not just their words, but every utterance they make. And, as I assessed that, once it worked, which wasn't until I was 41 that I got any attention for that work, large project called On the Road to Search for American Character, and often my work has to do with going to communities of disruption and discord. Much of the work is focused on race, that in some ways I was trying to, in becoming America, word for word, I was trying to close the gap. You asked me where I grew up, and as I was in one neighborhood, and then when housing opened up because of integration, moved to another neighborhood, I was trying to close the gap and the acceptance of alienation, which comes with segregation. I was trying to close that gap. I was trying to defy this idea that not just that I couldn't belong here or there, but I couldn't care about those people over there and had to accept the fact they didn't care about me. And so that's the work that became the center of the drama. It was a drama, I suppose. And then that's the drama that I've been investigating as I tried to become America. I would say that's my story. I think about when you say, what's your story? Growing up in the black church, one of the things that interests me was, I don't even know the name of I forget the name of the hymn, but it has a part in it that this is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. Maybe somebody knows. Do you know what the name of that hymn is? Yeah. You know the name of it?
You win a Pulitzer, and then you also
Blessed
get a Grammy for
Assurance.
singing.
It's called Blessed Assurance. Well, here's the last thing I want to say about it, is that I went to a church in Harlem with a friend of mine who had been the principal ballerina of Alwyn Nicolai's company. She was from Argentina, extraordinary woman, Luli Santangelo, and had done a lot of dance improvisation work with her in Tribeca when, Tribeca was nothing but button factories. And it was Father's Day, and there were a group of incarcerated men. And there was this one man, like a bullet, who got up and he was singing, "This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long," and just over and over again. And every time he sang that chorus, it meant more. And so when you say, what's your story? One of the things I think for people like me and Jeff, who have told parts of our story over and over again, is that we can only hope that we tell it in a way that it increases its meaning.
Jeff Koons, celebrated artist, provocateur in the collection of just about every great museum in America. What is your story, and what might we be surprised in the Jeff Koons story to learn that we haven't read about?
Anna, that was beautiful. But I liked listening to your story. You were speaking about America. I grew up in York, Pennsylvania, and I was born in 1955. And York is an historic town. The Continental Congress met in York for the first time, started writing the Articles of Confederation in York before they moved on to Philadelphia. And Philadelphia gets the credit for kind of being the first capital. But that always intrigued me, this aspect of history and a sense of uniting to something bigger than the self. I was born in 55. I grew up in a middle-class family. My parents were very, very generous to myself and my sibling sister. At around the age of 3 or 4, when I would be making drawings and things as such, my parents were very supportive. And it gave me a sense of self. I felt like I could do something that helped define who I was. And I started taking private art lessons, and my parents were generous. Again, they didn't have great means, but they were generous. And it turns out that when it came time to go to college, the only thing I was really prepared for was for art school. And I went to art school, and that's when I started to realize what art could be. Prior to going to art school, art was something that just created anxiety because it was a vehicle that was about rules, or it was like to perform and be judged in some manner that you were participating in a correct way, or a way that was looked at as good or bad. And finally, I realized that art connects you so effortlessly to all the human disciplines. And that's when my life was changed. And that's when I feel like I was able to become the individual that I could foresee that I could become a better individual, a vaster individual. And I enjoyed along the way feeling those sensations, the secretions that take place, the excitement, the development of the body and the mind, to feel that transcendence.
And did you feel that art unlocked something for you that a conventional, being like a CPA or something? For many people, I've had this conversation with like Mark Bradford, where he says, I would have failed. Without being an artist, there was no other option for me to be successful or to in any way but to be an artist. And were I not to be an artist, I can't imagine what my life. Most people can say, well, if I'm not something, I'll be something else. But many artists, and I'm curious from you and Anna, is, in the case of Mark, you said, art was my salvation.
I was brought up to be self-reliant. So my parents were very supportive, but I also had to pull my weight, and so I always had odd jobs. But as a young child, I would go door to door, and I would sell gift wrapping paper, I would sell chocolates, and I think that my practice, my intellectual development of being able to find interest outside the self really was beginning there. And I learned acceptance. I learned that when I would knock on the door, I never knew who was going to open the door, what they looked like. I didn't know what odors were going to come out of the home, whether the couch had plastic on it or whether it was ripped or stained. And it was really about acceptance and kind of meeting needs. So, art becomes this vehicle where I can be part of a larger group. and that this sense of isolation, alienation, of just the sense of being an individual, that I was able to be part of something bigger than myself. I could be part of a group. I desired to be, I loved the avant-garde, to be part of a group. And so, today I'm thrilled that one of the most meaningful things of my life, other than my family, which again, I'm part of a group, would be to be part of this art world, and how that helps me also be part of even a larger world.
And Anna, for you,
I don't think that I couldn't have done anything else. I found out, I invited my sister to come with me to when I was nominated for an NAACP award, which I have
among
been,
the many awards you've been nominated
I've never gotten
for.
one of them. Several times. I never make it over the border. But and she confessed to me, and this was years, my career was well established, that my mother really wanted me to be a school principal. And she had been an elementary school principal, and of course, in her day, being all her friends were teachers, all my aunts were teachers, as black women were teachers or nurses. But I think there's something, I love what you say about outside the self, and one of the reasons I created the form of theater I did was because there were so many assumptions when I was trained, and I think still are, that there's a truth inside of you that allows you to be anyone in the world, and I just had a real problem with that so-called truth, and committed myself to do the opposite, which is to find a way of acting outside of myself, focused on the other, and in particular people who were unlike me and who had different ideas than I had and different opinions than I had. But I think that one of the incredible things about what we do, some of us as artists, is to find out that it's something you can do. And that's what happened when I was 23, and I ended up in absolute accident in an acting class, and I found out, I can do this. And this summer, I made 2 performance labs for teenage girls. And then it became individuals, because one girl who we accepted in Baltimore at my high school, Western High School, became a boy before we started, or declared herself as identifying as a male. But so 2 of these performance labs, and one of them was with girls from an Indian reservation, the Yurok tribe, and they knew nothing about performance. And one in particular just came in with this hoodie on, completely covering her, Andrea. And I said to the person who I'd brought with me to teach dance, I said, Michael, try to get her to take that hoodie off. And he just looked at me like, well, she's not comfortable. And one of the young girls asked for a class on monologues. I don't know why. I said, well, who else wants a class on monologues? And surprisingly, Andrea raised her hand. Never done a monologue in her life. And we gave her this monologue, which she stumbled through. And then she went back to the dorm. We put them in dorms and she asked some of the elders from the tribe to help her with her monologue. Now, none of these people were actors either. And she came in and she took off her hoodie and she burst into this monologue. And all of us adults, teachers, just burst into tears. Because there's this, and I'm not even just talking about opportunity or equity, but it's miraculous to me that we can do things that we're not necessarily trained to do or born to do. And when I see that photograph of you in kindergarten with those crayons, I wonder if you knew that you could do what you could do.
Did you know, Jeff, with those crayons, that you were going to be Jeff Koons?
I remember coloring grapes. For myself, what I have enjoyed about the journey in art is that it's been a vehicle to help me learn self-acceptance. And when I went to art school, the first day of art school, and I talked about learning about the human disciplines, but the first day we went to the Baltimore Museum of Art. I went to the Maryland Institute College of Art, and we went there to see the Cohn Sisters collection. And it's a great collection of Matisse and Cezanne and Braque, and I realized I didn't know anybody. I would have known Picasso, but I didn't know Braque, I didn't know Cezanne, I didn't know anybody. And I survived that moment. And a lot of people don't survive that moment. And they always believe that they have to bring something to art other than who they are right at that moment. But somehow, through the background I had, the type of support I received, I was able just to accept my own cultural history to that moment and go forward. And this is something that I've tried to constantly within my work, is practice this self-acceptance in my own history, but to communicate that to the viewer, that everything about our histories, it's perfect to that moment. It can't be anything other than what it is. It doesn't mean that our future can't be different, but we just have to accept our past to that moment. And it's about going forward. And that's one of the main things that I've tried to communicate with my work. And the reason I work with the type of imagery is that people can feel this sense of acceptance and not in any manner feel that they need to bring something other than themselves.
But both of you have been pioneers. I mean, it's not as if you've been passive wallflowers in your respective disciplines. I mean, when you did Fire, I mean, I think about your early work. You were forging new ground. You were truly interdisciplinary. I mean, you had an interdisciplinarity to your practice that didn't look like a lot of other actors' practice. And obviously, Jeff, and in some ways, when we think about that moment when you burst onto the scene after the horrific Rodney King beating and all of that moment, it was as if you were the embodiment of a kind of a national catharsis over what we saw in that moment. So did you see yourself as an artist thinking, okay, I'm going to break new ground. I'm going to actually create new disciplines that bring the humanities and the fine arts and physics together the way you do?
No, I mean, did you? I mean, no, I had a question, and I'm still a teacher, so I mean that part. But I didn't become a principal, but I've never stopped teaching. I started teaching in 1974, and I have of late said two things to my students, starting around 2010. One, I start every class saying, "Confidence is overrated. Give doubt a try." And the other thing is the importance of questions, to come to learn with questions, looking for your question, not your answer. And so I had a question, which was, what is the relationship of language to identity? I wanted to know that. And that then flowered into all these other routes that I took. And to study identity, I had to move out of the silo of an acting studio or a theater, especially at that time, and to be very inquisitive about the identity of others, and then American identity. And it was really not the theater, because they were like, what is this? You couldn't have all these people anywhere but an airport. But so the theater it's not where I developed the work. I developed the work in universities that were in the 80s, diversifying their campuses, diversifying the quote-unquote canon, but nobody could get along. So I was hired to go to Princeton and make a piece in their 25th year of coeducation, when two of the eating clubs still would not accept women, and women of color felt assaulted in some ways. I think they had rapes of a variety of women on campus. And so I interviewed, something like 50 people, and made a piece in which people didn't agree. Ruth Simmons is in that particular piece. And then Penn, University of Pennsylvania, hired me for a similar reason. And so I'm already working in discord. I'm already working in the problem of an institution having an idea of itself, the outside having a different idea of itself, and people not being able to A, get along with one another, or come to grips about the new mission. And so that work prepared me to be able to go into the streets of Crown Heights after the riot that followed the death of Gavin Cato, discord between Jews and blacks. And then that further enabled me to do a big project and go to Los Angeles after that uprising and interview 320 people and represent different sides of the story and perform on Broadway, 43 of those people. So it was really not expecting the theater to train me for what I was doing. And I sought help from linguists. I read about all kinds of different people. I was certainly informed by Studs Terkel, a great Chicago journalist. And so sort of, I would say it was the original question, what is the relationship of language to identity? I still can't answer it, that put me on a road of discovery for myself and training myself to do it, because the last thing I'll say, the first one of these, I just walked up to people on the streets of New York and said, if you give me an hour of your time, I'll invite you to see yourself performed. I have an actor who looks like you. So there were 20 people, lifeguard at the Y, Meredith Monk, a hairdresser, somebody at J.C. Penney's, and they, in a loft in Tribeca, people came in with their entourage of friends to see themselves performed. And it was fun, and it worked. And at the end of it, I thought, well, I want to keep doing this, but I don't know how to pay people. And I remembered I was a mimic as a girl. I thought, well, I'll just do all the parts for now. But I was training myself.
So this was like a cheap way for you not to have to pay other actors?
It was also that, I guess. Well, I was the only one crazy enough to do it, too. So anyway, so it's, I would say, I think, you know, and we all start with an idea, and then we have to have the resilience to allow it to all fall on its face and keep going, I said. But I wasn't setting out to do anything new.
But I do want to press you on this issue of identity, because there are some in our society who say we pay too much attention and there's too much focus on identity. And I wonder how you interpret that critique.
I don't think it's going away anytime soon, especially with the mental health crisis in general, and the way I see that play out in working at New York University, and where so I play out this summer working with 2 communities of teenage individuals. So it's not going anywhere anytime fast. I think first of all, we could say it's too self-oriented if we're really concerned about making healthy democracies in a healthy world. But the way it's playing out in my field, and I don't want to get too caught up in this, is that acting is supposed to be about what I call a broad jump towards the other. You're jumping towards a character, and you hope you're going to make it, but you might not. And you might even end up in a situation where you're not Medea and you're not you. You're a not, which is another positive. But right now, you can't be anything but what you are. And you and I have talked about this a little bit. And it's kind of like a phase that we're going to have to go through. But I think it's really questionable to me. Therefore, can acting be any more a transcendent art, right? Can somebody play Jeff Koons, or can Jeff Koons only play Jeff Koons? But also that we've thought about the theater, we've thought about classrooms where we study theater, we've thought about audiences as places previously where we can take risks, and yet there are signs everywhere that we can't. If you see this show, you might be upset. Trigger warnings. In classes, we have to be so careful. We have coaches in any environment where we have human beings taking on parts, portraying stories of discord. We have coaches to make sure everybody's okay. What does that mean about my form? What does that mean about the notion of an artist as leader, as an artist as humanitarian? I don't know the answer to that, but that concerns me. And it may be an outgrowth of the same type of problem that people have about quote-unquote identity.
Jeff Koons, you've always been Jeff Koons. So let's talk about the time when I first read about you, because it was sensational. You were producing these monumental pieces, and you were simply everywhere, and everyone was talking about Jeff Koons. And it so upset this notion, going back to the Romantic ages, of the artist living in isolation, not engaged in the world, not in any way focused on producing anything for the world, but simply creating things that matter to him and him only. Was it important for you to be relevant, to become Jeff Koons, and to be the artist that every big collector wanted to have, every museum wanted to have? Was that important to you?
Anna, what you were saying about kind of the relevance, to the self, but to a community, that's my interests. I just wanted to participate. I never had any thoughts about anything other than to be part of the dialogue, like to make things and to want to be a part of the group. It wasn't any other goals other than that. I loved the feelings. I loved making work. I loved making things that would excite me and stimulate me. And then I would realize that I could stimulate other people and that I could try to communicate that. Art has been this amazing vehicle. It's let me practice the removal of judgment. It's helped me to try to embrace and to accept everything, and to be open to everything in life, and to just try to be influenced by the external world as much as possible. And to place myself in a position for kind of the highest level of consciousness, to have anxiety removed through the acceptance of everything. But at the same time, there's an understanding that some things aren't relevant to you at that moment, that other things can be more relevant. As an artist, I learned that the only thing that you can do creatively is to follow your interests. And so I would just always pursue, and in the world today, pursue my interests, follow them, think about them. And if you focus on your interests, it takes us to a very metaphysical place where we connect to a universal vocabulary. And no matter, this is just focusing on something. We all practice it in our own lives, and I'm sure we have all felt it to different degrees depending on the level of focus, how we're able to connect to a vaster vocabulary. When I was younger, I really cared only about those personal sensations, like to make something and feel the plastic quality of that feeling. But eventually, I like to think of the metaphor of hunting, and that, I learned how to kill a hare. I could bring home a rabbit. But at a certain point, when I had enough to eat and my stomach felt full, you want to hunt bigger game. And today I like to hunt for mammoth, and you try to bring home for the whole community. And but I feel the same tie to my grandparents, my relatives, how they were merchants, but they would interact with people. And at a certain point in your life, you realize that to be of service to the community is the greatest calling.
Anna, as an artist, do you fear being judged? Artists have always been fearless, it seems, and yet when I read memoirs of the great artists, they're racked with uncertainty and self-doubt and insecurity. Obviously, you've been judged to be great, so I guess you like it. But I mean, I'd be really curious. I mean,
I don't read reviews, so I don't assume that I'm being judged to be even passing. But I thought of something because there's another artist teacher who I work with who was talking about, I was so surprised just Sunday about having to be brave. And I started thinking about why people are scared. You know, even people who say they want to be artists or are artists, why are we scared? And I thought of something I'm going to do. I'm going to teach next spring. I'm going to have everybody write down, it's the first day of class, who in this room is judging you? Just look at the people, you don't even know them yet. Who's judging you? And then on another piece of paper, who's your worst critic? And then they're not here. They're not here today. Because I think, you know, it's like that worst critic is somebody from either who didn't exist or who isn't existing right now. Like, even if it were Frank Rich to come back to the New York Times, right? He's not at the New York Times right now, and I don't think he's here today. But we sort of carry with us this critic, whether it's your father or your brother or your preacher, whoever it was. And I'm just going to invite them to write that name down, and we're going to throw it in the trash ceremoniously and see if it has an effect in terms of this notion of a need for bravery, this fear that I've found increasing. Told you, I've taught since 1975. And since 2010, I've just watched this fear increase. And I think it's one thing to take a risk and have courage, but I do think that fear, you know, you talk about, you must have gone through quite a process to free yourself of judgment, whatever it is, you know. I just think there's just way too much. And that's also one of the reasons why we hear this word healing so much, right? And if artists are going to take on any of that role, I feel we're going to need more courage than we have right now. So one of the things is to get rid of who's the judge, who's the judge.
well, let's talk about, and this maybe is a good segue to this moment we're in, which I think requires courage and bravery and a willingness to take risk. So what's the role of the artist in a moment like this, a world turned upside down? What's the role of institutions like the National Gallery of Art or the Museum of Modern Art, where you are a trustee, Anna? So what's the role? What does an artist do? How can you help us, Jeff Koons, make sense of this crazy world?
I think artists just have to, follow their interests in whatever direction they would normally be pulled. I don't think that they should have to stress themselves in any moment to try to define the time. But automatically, I think you're aware of your environment. Of course, you want to be open to your environment completely. And I think that the times that we live in, artists realize that our works, our gestures are more important than ever because they're a way that we can show what we believe is relevant to humanity as human beings, and the empathy that we can have for each other, show the responsibility that we can feel for each other, and for our values and ideals. But I don't think that you can, I like to work very intuitively, so I don't sit down with a piece of paper and list that I want to make something in a very analytical way. I want to hit this point. I really want to, push on this idea and that idea. But I will just trust in an intuitive way that my interests and my beliefs are embedded within.
But Jeff, in that regard, when you wake up and you see some horrific act of inhumanity against other human beings, or you see some injustice or something that probably enrages you, that makes you think, how do we allow this to happen in the world? As an artist, do you feel a sense of engaging in that way, or do you say, I've got to follow my interests as it relates to whatever? Or, as some artists say, actually what's going on out in the world is not my domain. I'm interested in my creative practice, for example.
And I believe that I'm affected, by the environment. And of course, when you become enraged about something, it takes its place. The dialogue becomes important to you. So the work is affected by that. But I think that it's always important to be able to stay flexible, that you don't get labeled for one cause, but that you're able to address yourself to a lot of political situations. My own work, I think, is politically based because I think it's based in the empowerment of people. That's the basis of it. It tries to perform as a guide for empowerment. That's the joy that I find in my work. If I think about my work, I think of it as functioning within that way within a community to empower.
And obviously, some have said, you almost have a social practice. I mean, in the height of really the zeitgeist growing around the need to reform our criminal justice system, when Bryan Stevenson and others were really crafting a whole new understanding of what we now know as a sort of over-incarceration prison industrial complex in this country. You were in prisons interviewing particularly women, but how do you see your practice as an artist given this larger context socially and environmentally?
Well, I want to pick up what you asked about institutions as well, yes. Which is
yes.
that recently I had the great privilege and joy to work with two other members of the board of the Museum of Modern Art, and some of the fantastic curatorial staff and others, to look at the mission statement of 20 years ago and to come up with one for now. It was a process that was very efficient, but we just thought about every word. And the one 20 years ago was something like 465 words long, and the new one's less than 50 words long. And I went through and I looked at, what's missing besides a lot of verbiage? Words like, what's missing now from the 20 years ago, words like foremost, basically the spirit of the one and only, the best in the world. And what's there now is about welcoming, and being a place of coming together. And so I think one thing that institutions can do is to, and I encourage all younger artists to do, is to really rethink how we can use our beautiful buildings to open the doors for discussions about the things that are very difficult. I think that beauty attracts attention and engages us in a way that helps us take the medicine and face the music. And one of the projects that we'll see when it gets reviewed, but right now I'm most excited about is Renee Fleming asked me to write a libretto for an opera about gun violence among youth in Chicago. And I had a chance. You can't do something like that at all on your own. And because of COVID, I couldn't go into the neighborhoods. And I'm kind of glad, because if I had gone into the neighborhoods, I'm sure I would have underestimated how much security I actually needed. But I had the opportunity to collaborate with Arnie Duncan's incredible project called Chicago Cred. And his idea is you can't do this work from downtown. and he's working with the shooters to try to stop gun violence. And as he said, kids come up to him and say, "Man, what are you doing here?" And this is the important part. He says, "I'm here because you're here. I'm here because you're here." And to me, that goes back to Martin Buber's I Thou. We get a chance to look at people as an it or a you. And if it weren't for Ani Duncan, I couldn't have gotten access at all to the shooters and to the people who are trying to help them. And so I think it's about making spaces where we can go outside, come back in, and then have goodwill in the spaces where we make our work, where we don't agree, and where identities are now quite prevalent, and for good reason, and people get upset. But, I hope that, what can happen, neither I nor Yuval Sharon, the director, who's an extraordinary leader, currently the head of the Michigan Opera, he changed the name to the Detroit Opera, good for him, and Daniel Romain, a Haitian-American composer. I hope that we can do more than just show that at the Chicago Lyric Opera, but that it's a call for all the people who are really risking their lives. I'm not risking my life, and I'm not changing lives, but the people who are really risking their lives and really changing lives to come to the opera and see if it inspires them to move further. So I think, to me, it's all about collaborations with the people who are on the front lines.
But I also think, what you've just described is a profound disruption of a classical art form. So opera, the notion that you are writing a libretto, that you are bringing a sort of a scene, a narrative. Yes, there's lots of violence and mayhem in the history of opera, but contemporary. This is in some ways what Terence Blanchard was doing with Charles Blow's Fire Shot Up My Bones at the Metropolitan Opera, which, of course, by the way, as you know, many people, including some trustees of the Metropolitan Opera, were very apprehensive about. Would a traditional Met audience come to see a black production that's not Porgy?
Yeah, but how about the non-traditional audience that I don't think the Met has ever seen?
Well, this was part of the limited thinking that comes with classical ideology, that actually the pie is a finite pie, that actually we can't expand the pie to people who wouldn't traditionally be in the audience. And so I think what you're talking about really is both disrupting the art form, which is your tradition, your legacy as an artist, but also reaching people who would otherwise not be in sight of these traditional institutions, who, if they are to remain relevant, must evolve their programming, to evolve their audiences, to evolve support and relevance in the future. And so I think it's really interesting, as you know, I love what you and Renee are doing, and I think the fact that you're partnering on this, again, collaboration, is what is part of the power of this.
Well, I also just want to say that we could not do this without philanthropy. And so what you and others in this room are doing, and our friend Elizabeth Alexander are doing, to encourage what you call disruptions, I call openings, is very important. And without philanthropy as a form of leadership in doing this, it couldn't be possible. I want to just say one quick image, because I'm sure we're running out of time. You cannot imagine what it was like for me. Jessie Norman was like my big sister, but to walk into the rehearsal room for a workshop for an opera, first of all, this great big thing, the big page they write on, But I walk in the room, and there's this room full of black young opera singers sitting like this, waiting for this rehearsal about gun violence in Chicago to begin. Actors don't sit like this on the first day of rehearsal. We're like that, get coffee, somebody's out trying to get a cigarette. It was stunning to me that these classically, and they have to be classically trained to do what Yuval and Daniel and I are asking them to do. And so it's also that we shouldn't throw those traditions out,
Absolutely
right?
not.
I mean, they're so prepared. It was so moving. I just wanted to drop that image in there.
Thank you. We cannot throw the tradition out. And at the end of the day, this is about excellence. That gets lost sometimes, that we are simply seeking excellence, and seeking excellence in a way that includes all the possibilities for excellence. When we have excluded for so long the possibility that there could be excellence, I'm reminded of the as Peter Garrell wrote about in the Times, this great idea, this great libretto they were presented with in the 1920s. And they were excited about it until they found out that it was submitted by a black classically trained librettist. And the Met said, we can't present this for our audience. They thought it was excellent until they realized that the creator of it was a black man. So I think the goal is always excellence. We can't ever, the work, the training that is needed, there are no shortcuts for that. And on that note, please join me in thanking Anna Deavere Smith and Jeff Koons.